The crack of Lieutenant Brent Rollins's palm against Luther Rowe's weathered face echoed through the Winston Hill courthouse like a gunshot. Blood splattered across the elderly man's glasses as the 72-year-old stumbled, but refused to fall his dignity intact, even as crimson dripped from his split lip. Not a single person in that courtroom moved to help, not the judge, not the clerks, not even the other officers who witnessed a badge become a weapon against an innocent man. But at the back of the room, hidden in shadow, Marcus Rowe watched his father bleed, and something cold and precise began to form behind his federal agent's eyes. If you're watching from your city, let me know in the comments below. I want to see how far this story of justice travels. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Winston Hill courthouse, creating bars of light across the worn marble floor. Luther Rowe adjusted his best suit, the navy blue one he'd worn to his wife's funeral 3 years ago, and checked his watch for the third time. 8:47 a.m. He wasn't due to testify until 9, but Luther had always believed in being early. 72 years on this earth had taught him that punctuality was a form of respect, especially for a black man navigating spaces where respect was rarely given freely. He sat on the hard wooden bench outside Courtroom 3B, his arthritic hands folded over the manila envelope containing the documents his neighbor Mrs. Chen needed for her testimony. She was fighting an unlawful eviction, and Luther had witnessed the landlord's harassment firsthand. The same landlord who happened to golf with half the police force every Sunday at the country club. "You didn't have to come, Mr. Rowe," Mrs. Chen had said when she called him the night before, her voice trembling with the weight of fighting alone. "Yes, I did," Luther had replied simply. "That's what neighbors do." The courthouse hallway smelled of old wood and floor wax, tinged with the bitter scent of burnt coffee from the vending machine that hadn't worked properly since 2018. Luther watched lawyers in expensive suits stride past their leather shoes clicking with purpose, barely noticing the ordinary citizens waiting their turn for justice. At 8:55, the courtroom doors opened, and Luther stood his knees protesting the movement. Years of construction work had left their mark, but he moved with the careful dignity of a man who had learned to carry his pain quietly. As he entered the courtroom, the morning crowd was already assembling, a mix of lawyers, defendants, plaintiffs, and witnesses, all preparing for another day in the grinding machinery of the legal system. Luther took a seat in the third row behind Mrs. Chen and her public defender, a young woman who looked fresh out of law school, her suit slightly too large for her small frame. Across the aisle sat the landlord, Richard Brennan, a man whose belly stretched his pinstriped shirt and whose fingers were adorned with rings that caught the light. Next to him sat his lawyer, and behind them, like a wall of blue solidarity, 3 off-duty police officers who'd come to support their friend. One of them was Lieutenant Brent Rollins. Luther had heard about Rollins, though they'd never met face to face. In a city like Winston Hill, population 382,000, certain names carried weight, some good, most bad. Rollins was known in the black community as someone to avoid to cross the street when you saw him coming, to make sure your hands were visible and your voice was steady if he decided you were worth his attention. At 43, he'd been on the force for 20 years, decorated twice for bravery, though the stories whispered in barbershops and beauty salons painted a different picture of his service. Rollins sat with his legs spread wide, taking up space like he owned it, his uniform crisp despite being off-duty, his badge gleaming even in the courtroom's fluorescent lighting. His eyes, a cold blue that reminded Luther of winter ice, scanned the room with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Patricia Henley entered, her black robes swishing as she took her seat. Luther had hoped for Judge Martinez or Judge Williams, judges with reputations for fairness. But Henley was known for her tough-on-crime stance and her tendency to side with law enforcement. The prosecution's choice, no doubt. The proceedings began with typical legal formalities. Mrs. Chen's public defender, Sarah Kim, presented her opening statement with nervous but passionate energy, outlining the pattern of harassment, the suspicious timing of the eviction notice just after Mrs. Chen had reported the building's code violations and the landlord's history of targeting elderly tenants. Brennan's lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Derek Walsh, who probably billed more per hour than Luther had made in a month during his working years, painted Mrs. Chen as a troublesome tenant who'd repeatedly violated her lease terms and was now trying to avoid rightful eviction by playing the victim. Luther watched it all with the weary recognition of someone who'd seen this play before. The powerful protecting the powerful, the system working exactly as designed. He squeezed the envelope in his lap, knowing his testimony might not change anything but determined to speak truth anyway. It was 10:17 when things began to shift. Mrs. Chen was on the stand, her English faltering under Walsh's aggressive questioning. The lawyer kept interrupting her, demanding she speak up, speak clearly, asking her to repeat herself with theatrical frustration that was clearly meant to fluster her further. I try to explain, Mrs. Chen said, her hands trembling. Mr. Brennan, he come to my apartment at night, very late, saying I must leave or... Objection, Walsh cut in smoothly. Hearsay and speculation. Sustained, Judge Henley said without looking up from her notes. Sarah Kim stood. Your Honor, my client is testifying to direct conversations she had with... I said sustained, counselor. Move on. Luther felt his jaw clench. He'd heard those exact words from Mrs. Chen the night Brennan had shown up at her door at 11 p.m. drunk and belligerent. Luther had been taking out his trash and heard the shouting through the thin walls of their apartment building. The examination continued with Walsh systematically dismantling Mrs. Chen's testimony, using her accented English against her, making her repeat phrases until they sounded uncertain, turning her fear into something that looked like guilt to anyone who wasn't paying attention to the cruelty of the performance. It was during a brief recess that Luther made his first mistake, or perhaps his first act of courage, depending on how you counted such things. He approached Sarah Kim as she gathered her papers, looking overwhelmed. Ma'am, he said quietly, I have documents here that might help. Photographs of Mr. Brennan at Mrs. Chen's door that night, dated and time-stamped. Recording from my phone too, though it's not great quality. Sarah's eyes widened. Mr. Rowe? Why didn't you? We could have submitted these as evidence earlier. I tried, Luther said. Called your office 3 times, left messages, sent emails, nobody called back. Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment and frustration. I'm so sorry. We've been overwhelmed, and the office... Let me see what I can do. She hurried over to Judge Henley's bench, where a heated discussion ensued. Luther couldn't hear the words, but he could see the judge's expression growing increasingly irritated. Walsh had joined them, his arms crossed, shaking his head emphatically. After 5 minutes, Sarah returned looking defeated. The judge says it's too late to introduce new evidence. She won't allow it. But, I'm sorry, Mr. Rowe, I really am. Luther felt something hot rise in his chest, not quite anger, but its cousin, a righteous indignation that had been simmering for decades. He stood up, his voice carrying across the courtroom, despite his intention to speak quietly. Your Honor, he said, and every head turned. With respect, ma'am, this evidence could prove Mrs. Chen is telling the truth. How can it be too late for the truth? Judge Henley's face darkened. Sir, you are out of order. Sit down immediately. I have a recording of Mr. Brennan threatening her, Your Honor. Threatening to have her deported if she didn't leave, even though she's been a citizen for 15 years. Don't that matter? Bailiff, Judge Henley said sharply. But Luther continued, his voice steady and clear. I've lived in this community for 43 years. I've seen Mr. Brennan force out 6 elderly tenants in the last 2 years, all so he can renovate and charge triple the rent. Mrs. Chen is just trying to keep her home. Doesn't justice mean anything in this courtroom? The silence that followed was electric. Brennan's face had turned purple. Walsh was on his feet, demanding Luther be held in contempt. And Lieutenant Brent Rollins was standing up slowly, his hand moving to his hip, where his service weapon would normally rest, finding only his belt. I'll handle this, Your Honor, Rollins said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. Lieutenant Rollins, you're not on duty. Judge Henley said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to his intervention. "Man's disturbing the peace and threatening the integrity of these proceedings," Rollins said, moving toward Luther with the measured steps of a predator. "Could be considered intimidation of a witness. Mr. Brennan here feels threatened." Luther stood his ground, though his heart was racing. "I'm not threatening nobody. I'm just trying to—" The slap came without warning. Rollins' hand moved with practiced speed, the back of it catching Luther across the face with enough force to snap his head sideways. Luther's glasses flew off, clattering across the floor. Blood immediately began flowing from his nose and a cut on his lip where his teeth had caught the soft tissue. The courtroom gasped collectively, then fell into absolute silence. Luther stumbled, but didn't fall. His hand went to his face, coming away red. He looked at the blood on his weathered palm with a kind of detached wonder, then raised his eyes to meet Rollins. "Feel like a big man now?" Luther asked quietly, blood dripping onto his good suit. Rollins stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. "You're lucky that's all you get, old man. In my day, we knew how to deal with troublemakers like you." "Lieutenant Rollins," Judge Henley said, but her voice lacked any real censure. "Perhaps we should—" "No need, Your Honor," Rollins said, straightening his uniform. "Message has been delivered. Some people need to learn respect for the law." Luther bent slowly, painfully, to pick up his glasses. One lens was cracked spiderwebbing from the point of impact. As he straightened, he became aware of a presence at the back of the courtroom, someone who'd entered during the commotion. The man stood in the shadows by the door, his face obscured, but his posture suggested coiled readiness. He wore a simple black suit, well-fitted but not flashy, and he held himself with a stillness that somehow commanded attention, despite his apparent effort to remain unnoticed. "Your Honor," Sarah Kim finally found her voice. "Lieutenant Rollins just assaulted my witness. I demand—" "You demand nothing in my courtroom," Judge Henley snapped. "Mr. Rowe disrupted these proceedings and acted in a threatening manner." Lieutenant Rollins responded to maintain order. "Unless Mr. Rowe wants to face contempt charges, I suggest he sit down and remain silent for the remainder of these proceedings." "But, Your Honor—" "Ms. Kim, one more word, and you'll be joining him." Luther wiped blood from his face with his handkerchief, his movements deliberate and dignified. He looked at Mrs. Chen, who was crying silently, her hands covering her mouth. He looked at the other people in the courtroom, the clerk who was studiously examining her computer screen, the bailiff who had found something fascinating about his shoes, the few civilians who were already pretending they hadn't seen anything. "It's all right, Mrs. Chen," Luther said, his voice slightly muffled by the handkerchief pressed to his nose. "Truth has a way of coming out even when people try to slap it down." Rollins laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Truth, you want to know the truth, old man. Truth is you're nobody. Truth is you got no power here. Truth is I could put you on the ground right now and everyone in this room would swear you tripped." "That's enough, Lieutenant," Judge Henley said, though she sounded more tired than authoritative. Luther sat down slowly, his body protesting every movement. The blood from his nose had slowed but not stopped, and he could taste copper in his mouth. His left eye was beginning to swell where Rollins' hand had caught him. The trial resumed with mechanical efficiency, as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Chen, thoroughly shaken, could barely speak above a whisper for the rest of her testimony. Sarah Kim's objections were overruled with increasing frequency. Brennan's witnesses, including 2 of the off-duty cops, testified to what a problem tenant Mrs. Chen had been, how she'd been disruptive, hostile, possibly even dangerous. Luther watched it all through his cracked glasses, holding his bloodied handkerchief to his face, a monument to the justice system's failure, sitting in plain view of everyone who chose not to see. When he was finally called to testify, Luther stood carefully. The left side of his face had swollen considerably, and his eye was nearly shut. Judge Henley looked at him with barely concealed irritation. "Mr. Rowe, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Luther said clearly. "Be seated." Sarah Kim approached him gently. "Mr. Rowe, can you tell us what you witnessed on the night of October 15th? Luther straightened in his chair. "I saw Mr. Brennan come to Mrs. Chen's apartment at approximately 11:15 p.m. He was intoxicated and—" "Objection!" Walsh called out. "The witness is not qualified to determine intoxication." "Sustained," Luther continued. Mr. Brennan appeared unsteady on his feet, and his speech was slurred. He banged on Mrs. Chen's door loud enough that I could hear it from my apartment 2 doors down. "And what happened next?" Mrs. Chen opened the door slightly with the chain on. Mr. Brennan demanded she let him in. When she refused, he said, and I'm quoting here, "You got 2 choices, lady. You can leave by the end of the month, or I'll make sure ICE knows about you and your whole family." "Objection!" Walsh was on his feet. "Hearsay. Your Honor." Sarah said, "Mr. Rowe is testifying to what he directly heard." Judge Henley seemed to consider this for a moment. "Overruled. But tread carefully, counselor." Luther continued his testimony describing how he'd intervened, how Brennan had threatened him too, saying he had friends who could make Luther's life very difficult. He testified about the pattern of harassment he'd witnessed, the late-night visits, the sudden maintenance emergencies that always seemed to happen when Mrs. Chen was at work, leaving her apartment vulnerable. Through it all, Rollins watched him with undisguised contempt, occasionally whispering something to Brennan or the other officers that would make them chuckle quietly. When Walsh began his cross-examination, he immediately went on the attack. "Mr. Rowe, isn't it true you've been arrested before?" Luther frowned. "That was in 1971. I was protesting. A simple yes or no, Mr. Rowe. Have you been arrested?" "Yes, but—" "And isn't it true you have a grudge against Mr. Brennan because he raised your rent last year?" "He raised everyone's rent. That's not—" "Yes or no, Mr. Rowe?" "Yes, he raised the rent." "And isn't it true that you and Mrs. Chen have been conspiring to force Mr. Brennan to sell the building to a community group you're part of?" "That's not—" "Are you or are you not part of the Winston Hill Community Housing Initiative?" "I am, but—" "An organization that has repeatedly targeted landlords it deems problematic." "Correct." Sarah objected, but was overruled. The questioning continued in this vein for 20 minutes, Walsh twisting every word, every action into something sinister. Luther's military service became a history of violence. His community organizing became rabble-rousing. His attempt to help Mrs. Chen became interference with lawful business practices. Through it all, the blood from Luther's nose occasionally dripped onto his shirt, a red punctuation mark that everyone pretended not to see. Finally, mercifully, Luther was dismissed. As he stood to leave the witness stand, Rollins stuck out his foot slightly. Luther saw it stopped and looked down at the lieutenant. "Careful, old man," Rollins said quietly. "Wouldn't want you to have an accident." Luther stepped over the foot deliberately and returned to his seat. The rest of the trial was a foregone conclusion. Despite Sarah Kim's passionate closing argument, despite the obvious inconsistencies in Brennan's witnesses' testimonies, Judge Henley ruled in favor of the landlord. Mrs. Chen had 30 days to vacate the premises. She was also ordered to pay Brennan's legal fees. As the courtroom began to empty, Luther helped Mrs. Chen gather her things. She was crying quietly, apologizing to him for his injuries for getting him involved. "Don't you apologize," Luther said firmly. "We did the right thing. Sometimes that's all you can do." "But your face. What that policeman did—" "I've had worse," Luther said, which was true. "And I'm still standing." As they moved toward the exit, Rollins intercepted them, flanked by his 2 off-duty buddies. "Hope you learned something today," Rollins said, his voice pitched low enough that only Luther and Mrs. Chen could hear. "This is our city, our rules. You people need to remember your place." "Our place," Luther said slowly, "is wherever we choose to stand." Rollins' face darkened. You got a mouth on you, boy." The word hung in the air like a poison cloud. Luther felt Mrs. Chen's hand on his arm squeezing, warning him not to respond. But he was 72 years old, he'd been called that word more times than he could count, and he was tired. "I'm not your boy," Luther said quietly. "Haven't been anybody's boy since I came back from Vietnam in '73, and you hitting me doesn't change that." Rollins stepped close enough that Luther could smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "You're right. You're not a boy. You're just another worthless—" "Lieutenant Rollins." The voice came from behind Luther, calm, but carrying an undertone of steel. Everyone turned to see the man in the black suit who'd been standing at the back of the courtroom. Up close, Luther could see he was younger than his gravitas suggested, maybe late 30s, early 40s. He was black with close-cropped hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. "This doesn't concern you," Rollins said, though something in his posture shifted, became slightly less certain. "No," the man agreed. "It doesn't. Just wanted to make sure Mr. Rowe and Mrs. Chen made it to their vehicles safely. Lot of accidents happen in parking lots." "You threatening a police officer?" Rollins's hand went to his hip again, that unconscious reach for authority. "Threatening?" The man smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just a concerned citizen making an observation about parking lot safety. Statistical fact: parking lots are where 20% of all vehicle accidents occur, higher percentage for pedestrians over 65. Just think everyone should be careful." There was something in the way he said it, something in his stillness, that made Rollins' partners exchange glances. "Come on, Brent," one of them said. "Brennan's waiting. We got that thing." Rollins held the stranger's gaze for another long moment, then spat on the floor near Luther's feet. "Yeah, we got that thing." He looked back at Luther. "See you around, old man." After they left, Luther turned to thank the stranger, but he was already moving toward the exit. "Wait," Luther called. "I don't even know your name." The man paused at the door, glanced back. "Take care of that face, Mr. Rowe. Looks like you need medical attention." And then he was gone. Mrs. Chen insisted on driving Luther to the emergency room, though he protested he was fine. The ER doctor, a young Pakistani woman who reminded Luther of his late daughter, confirmed his nose wasn't broken, but he had a significant contusion and would have quite the black eye. "You should file a police report," she said while cleaning the cut on his lip. Luther almost laughed. "The man who did this is a police lieutenant." The doctor's hands stilled for a moment. "I see." She continued working in silence, but before Luther left, she slipped him a business card. "My cousin is a civil rights attorney, in case you change your mind." Luther tucked the card in his pocket, knowing he wouldn't call. What was the point? He'd seen enough in his 72 years to know how these things went. Rollins would say Luther was aggressive, threatening. The other officers would back him up. Judge Henley would say she saw nothing excessive. The system would protect its own the way it always had. That night, Luther sat in his small apartment, holding a bag of frozen peas to his swollen face. The local news was on, but nothing about what happened in the courtroom. Of course not. An old black man getting slapped by a cop wasn't news in Winston Hill. It was just Tuesday. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer it. His face hurt, and he wasn't in the mood to talk, but the number was unfamiliar, and something made him pick up. "Mr. Rowe." The voice was familiar, the man from the courthouse. "Yes? How's your face?" "Been better. Look, I wanted to thank you." "Mr. Rowe, I need you to listen carefully. Tomorrow morning you're going to get a call from a lawyer named David Park. He's going to want to meet with you about what happened today. I appreciate the thought, but I can't afford—" "You won't be paying. Just meet with him. Tell him everything. Every detail about what Rollins did, what the judge said, how nobody intervened. Everything." "Why?" Luther asked. "Why do you care what happens to an old man you don't even know?" There was a long pause. Then, "Because some things need to be made right, and because Lieutenant Rollins has been getting away with this for too long. Tomorrow, Mr. Rowe. Don't forget." The line went dead. Luther sat in his darkened apartment, the phone still in his hand, the frozen peas numbing his swollen face. Through his cracked glasses, he could see his reflection in the blank television screen, an old man beaten, but not broken, bloodied, but not bowed. He thought about Rollins' words, "You're nobody." Maybe that was true. He was nobody special, just a retired construction worker living on Social Security, trying to help his neighbor keep her home. Nobody important, nobody powerful. But tomorrow, apparently, somebody thought he was worth something. Somebody thought his story mattered. Luther adjusted the frozen peas and settled back in his chair. His face hurt, his body ached, and he'd watched justice fail again today. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the bright burning hope of youth, but something quieter, steadier. The hope of a man who'd been knocked down before and gotten back up. The hope of someone who'd learned that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, even when you stand alone, somebody notices. Somebody cares. Somebody acts. In the morning, David Park would call. But tonight, Luther Rowe sat in his small apartment in Winston Hill, face swollen glasses, cracked, suit still stained with his own blood, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The city lights flickered outside his window, and somewhere in those lights, the man in the black suit was making phone calls, reviewing footage, and setting in motion events that would shake Winston Hill to its very foundation. But Luther didn't know that yet. All he knew was that he'd stood up in that courtroom and spoken truth, even when truth earned him a bloody mouth. He'd refused to fall when knocked down. He'd looked a violent man in the eye and hadn't blinked. "I'm still standing," he said to his reflection. And in a federal building across town, Special Agent Marcus Rowe sat at his computer reviewing the courtroom security footage he'd just finished downloading. He watched the slap again, the casual violence of it, the smirk on Rollins' face, the way nobody moved to help his father. His father. Marcus had been in Detroit on assignment, hadn't even known about the trial until Mrs. Chen had called him that morning, frantic saying his father was testifying, and she was worried about him. Marcus had driven through the night, arriving just in time to watch Lieutenant Brent Rollins assault the man who'd raised him, who'd taught him to stand up straight, speak truth, and never let anyone make him feel like less than he was. He pulled up Rollins's file on his computer. 20 years of complaints mysteriously dismissed. 3 fatal shootings all ruled justified. Dozens of excessive force allegations that went nowhere. Protected by the blue wall enabled by judges like Henley, free to terrorize with impunity. Marcus picked up his phone, dialed a number from memory. Assistant Director Walsh. "Sir, it's Agent Rowe. I need to brief you on a situation in Winston Hill. We're going to need a full task force." "Rowe, you're supposed to be in Detroit." "This is priority, sir. I have video evidence of a police lieutenant assaulting a civilian in open court with multiple witnesses, including a judge who failed to intervene. But that's just the beginning." There was a pause. "How deep does this go?" Marcus looked at the screen, at the frozen image of his father's bloodied face, at Rollins's satisfied expression, at Judge Henley's calculated indifference. "All the way, sir. This goes all the way to the top. You have a personal connection to this." Marcus had always prided himself on his professionalism, his ability to separate personal from professional. But watching that video, seeing his father's dignity in the face of such contempt, he made a choice. "The victim is my father, sir. But this isn't about revenge. This is about a pattern of civil rights violations that we've been tracking for 3 years. Rollins just gave us the opening we needed." Another pause, longer this time. "You know you can't be lead on this if it's personal." "I know, sir. Send Jenkins to run point, but I want to be involved." "Rowe." "Sir, with all due respect, my father stood up in that courtroom, knowing what it might cost him. He did it because it was right. I'm not asking to run the investigation. I'm asking to be part of the team that makes sure his courage means something." Walsh sighed. "I'll have Jenkins in Winston Hill by tomorrow afternoon. You can brief him, but then you step back. Understood?" "Understood, sir." "And Rowe, I'm sorry about your father." "Don't be sorry, sir. He's still standing." Marcus hung up and continued reviewing the footage, taking notes, building the case. He pulled up financial records, phone logs, patterns of communication between Rollins, Brennan, Judge Henley, and a dozen other names that kept appearing in complaints that went nowhere. At 3 a.m., he finally had enough for the initial brief. He encrypted the files, sent them to Jenkins and Walsh, then leaned back in his chair. He thought about calling his father, telling him who he really was, why he'd been in that courtroom. But not yet. Luther Rowe had raised him to do the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He'd taught Marcus that justice wasn't just about the law. It was about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Tomorrow, David Park would meet with Luther. Park was one of the best civil rights attorneys in the country, and he owed Marcus a favor. He'd take Luther's case pro bono, file federal charges that would bypass the local courts entirely. Then the FBI task force would arrive. They'd interview witnesses, pull surveillance footage, dig into financial records. They'd find the connections, the payoffs, the pattern of corruption that had let men like Rollins operate with impunity for decades. It would take time. These things always did. But Marcus was patient. He'd learned that from his father too, the long game, the steady pressure, the relentless pursuit of truth. He pulled up one more file, Judge Patricia Henley. 3 years of questionable rulings. Suspicious patterns in sentencing. Campaign contributions from interesting sources. She'd sat there and watched a 72-year-old man get assaulted in her courtroom and done nothing. Marcus smiled grimly. She probably thought she was untouchable, protected by the same system that protected Rollins. She was about to learn otherwise. The sun was starting to rise over Winston Hill, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the city, Lieutenant Brent Rollins was probably sleeping soundly, confident in his power, secure in his position. Somewhere else, Luther Rowe was probably awake, face throbbing, wondering if anything would come from that mysterious phone call. And in his federal building office, Special Agent Marcus Rowe was working, building the case that would bring them all down. Not with violence, not with the same brutality they'd shown, but with something far more devastating. The truth meticulously documented, impossibly to deny, presented in a federal courtroom where judges like Henley had no power and the blue wall couldn't protect anyone. He thought about his father's words in the courtroom. Truth has a way of coming out even when people try to slap it down. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. His father had no idea how right he was. The phone on his desk rang. It was Jenkins, already up and reviewing the files. "Jesus Christ, Marcus. This is huge. This isn't just Rollins. This is systemic. How long has this been going on?" "Decades, probably, but we're going to end it. You know they're going to come at us hard. The police union, the mayor's office, everyone who's benefited from this system." "Let them come," Marcus said, thinking of his father standing in that courtroom, blood on his face but steel in his spine. "We've got the truth on our side. Truth doesn't always win, Marcus." "No," Marcus agreed, "but this time it will. This time we're going to make sure of it." He hung up and went back to work. There would be time for sleep later, time for rest when the job was done. For now, there was only the work, the careful, methodical process of building a case that would stand up in federal court, that would withstand every challenge, every attempt to discredit or dismiss. Outside his window, Winston Hill was waking up. People were heading to work, children were going to school, life was continuing as if nothing had changed. They had no idea what was coming, the storm that was about to break over their city. But Luther Rowe would know soon enough. And Lieutenant Brent Rollins would learn that some old men don't fall down no matter how hard you hit them. They stand. They testify. And sometimes when the universe is paying attention, they win. The call came at 7:43 a.m., just as Luther was trying to manage his morning coffee with his swollen face. David Park's voice was crisp professional, but with an undercurrent of urgency that made Luther set down his mug. "Mr. Rowe, I understand you had an encounter with Lieutenant Rollins yesterday. I'd like to meet with you as soon as possible. Like I told your associate last night, I can't afford a lawyer." "You're not paying Mr. Rowe. Can you come to my office at 9? Luther touched his swollen eye gingerly. "I don't drive much these days. My vision ain't what it used to be, especially now with these cracked glasses." "I'll send a car." 8:30. After Luther agreed and hung up, he stood in his small kitchen, wondering who exactly was pulling these strings. The mysterious man from the courthouse, now this lawyer. In his experience, help like this always came with a price. The car that arrived was a black town car, not ostentatious, but clearly expensive. The driver, a young Latino man named Carlos, helped Luther into the back seat, without comment about his battered face, though Luther caught him glancing in the rearview mirror several times during the drive downtown. David Park's office occupied the entire 40th floor of the Meridian Tower, Winston Hill's tallest building. The reception area alone was larger than Luther's entire apartment, all marble and glass and modern art that probably cost more than he'd made in his lifetime. Park himself was not what Luther expected. Korean-American mid-40s with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes that suggested too many long nights fighting battles in courtrooms. His handshake was firm, and he looked directly at Luther's swollen face, without flinching or looking away. "Coffee, Mr. Rowe, water." "Water would be good." Park's office had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Luther could see the courthouse from here, small and insignificant from this height. Park gestured to a leather chair across from his massive desk, then surprised Luther by taking the chair next to him instead of sitting behind the desk. "Before we begin," Park said, "I need you to understand something. What happened to you yesterday wasn't an isolated incident. Lieutenant Rollins has a pattern of behavior that goes back years. You're not his first victim, but if we do this right, you'll be his last." Luther shifted in his chair, the leather creaking under him. "Why do you care? And don't tell me it's pro bono goodwill. Lawyers like you don't work for free without a reason." Park smiled slightly. "You're right. I have a client who has a vested interest in seeing justice done in this case. They've asked to remain anonymous for now, but I can tell you their motivations are personal, not financial." The man from the courthouse. "I'm not at liberty to say. What I can tell you is that we have resources, we have evidence, and we have the will to take this all the way. But I need to know if you're prepared for what that means." Luther thought about Mrs. Chen crying in her apartment last night, already packing her belongings. He thought about all the others who'd been pushed out, pushed down, pushed around by men like Rollins and Brennan. "What does it mean?" Park pulled out a tablet, swiped through several screens. "It means federal civil rights charges against Rollins. It means an investigation into the entire Winston Hill Police Department. It means you testifying in federal court, not in front of Judge Henley, but in front of judges who take assault and civil rights violations seriously." He paused. "It also means you'll become a target. Rollins has friends. They'll try to intimidate you, discredit you, maybe worse." "They already hit me in the face in open court," Luther said dryly. "How much worse can it get?" Park's expression darkened. "You'd be surprised. I've seen witnesses have their homes vandalized, their families threatened, their past mistakes dragged into the light. They'll go through your entire life looking for something, anything, to make you look like the bad guy." Luther was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "In 1971, I was arrested at a protest. We were trying to integrate a public pool. They charged me with disturbing the peace and resisting arrest, though all I did was refuse to leave when they told us to. Is that the kind of thing they'll use? They'll try. But a civil rights arrest from 1971. That makes you look like a hero, not a criminal. Anything else? I got behind on my taxes once back in '08 when the economy crashed. Took me 3 years to pay it off, but I paid every penny plus penalties. That's nothing. Half of America had financial problems in '08. Anything else? Any drug arrests, domestic issues, Anything they could twist. Luther shook his head. I've lived a quiet life, Mr. Park. Worked construction until my back gave out. Raised my family, lost my wife to cancer 3 years ago. My biggest rebellion these days is feeding the pigeons in the park, even though there's a sign saying not to. Park actually laughed at that. I think we can handle the pigeon feeding scandal. Now let me show you what we have. He pulled up a video on his tablet. It was the courthouse security footage, crystal clear, showing Rollins striking Luther. This is from 3 different angles. The courthouse has excellent cameras, probably because they're worried about violence against judges. Ironically, they captured violence by the system instead. Luther watched himself get hit, watched himself stay standing. It was surreal seeing it from the outside. You can see Judge Henley. She saw the whole thing. Yes, and that's important. Her failure to act to even censure Rollins makes this a systemic issue, not just one bad officer. We also have this. He pulled up another video, this one from a cell phone. Someone in the gallery had recorded the whole thing. The audio was clear. You could hear Rollins's threats, his use of the word boy, the contempt in his voice. Who recorded this? A court reporter named Angela Martinez. She came forward last night, said she couldn't stay silent after what she saw. She's willing to testify. Luther felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of a knot he hadn't realized was there. Someone else had seen. Someone else had cared enough to act. Park continued, pulling up document after document. We have 17 previous complaints against Rollins, all dismissed or buried. We have financial records showing interesting payments between Brennan and several officers. We have a pattern of civil rights violations going back a decade. If you have all this, why do you need me? Because you're the spark, Mr. Rowe. You're the case that's so egregious, so clearly documented, that they can't dismiss it. You're a 72-year-old man with no criminal record who was assaulted for trying to tell the truth. You're sympathetic, credible, and most importantly, you're brave enough to stand up when others won't. Luther was quiet, processing everything. Then, something occurred to him. Wait, you said financial records complaints going back years. That's not public information. How did you... Park held up a hand. I can't discuss our sources, but I can tell you everything we have was obtained legally and will stand up in court. There was a knock on the door, and Park's assistant entered. Mr. Park, Agent Jenkins from the FBI is here. Luther's eyebrows rose. The FBI. Park stood. Did I forget to mention, this isn't just a civil case, Mr. Rowe. The FBI has been investigating corruption in the Winston Hill Police Department for 3 years. Your case is the break they've been waiting for. Agent Jenkins was a tall, thin white man with the kind of neutral expression that gave nothing away. He shook Luther's hand carefully, mindful of his injuries, and took a seat. Mr. Rowe, I want to be clear about what's happening here, Jenkins said. This is no longer just about what Lieutenant Rollins did to you. We believe he's part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple officers, city officials, and possibly judges. Your assault yesterday was captured on multiple cameras. It's given us probable cause to expand our investigation. You've been investigating for 3 years, Luther asked. Yes, but we've struggled to find victims willing to testify. People are scared, Mr. Rowe, with good reason. The last person who agreed to cooperate had their house burned down. Officially ruled an electrical fire, but we have our doubts. Luther felt a chill run down his spine. And you think I'll be different? I think you already are, Jenkins said. You stood up in that courtroom knowing what might happen. You took that slap and didn't fall. That kind of courage is rare. I'm just an old man who's tired of seeing wrong win. Jenkins leaned forward. That's exactly what we need. Someone who's not afraid, who has nothing to lose, who's willing to speak truth to power. I have plenty to lose, Luther said quietly. My home, my peace, maybe my life. But some things are worth losing those things for. Park and Jenkins exchanged glances. Then Park said, If you agree to cooperate, we can offer protection. FBI surveillance, regular check-ins, panic button. Make me look guilty having FBI protection, like I'm some kind of criminal who made a deal. Or it makes you look like what you are, Jenkins said. A witness to corruption who's brave enough to testify despite the danger. Luther stood up, walked to the window. From this height, Winston Hill looked peaceful, orderly. You couldn't see the rot from up here, couldn't see the Brennans and Rollins and Henleys grinding people down, stealing their homes, their dignity, their hope. My father, Luther said, still looking out the window, was a sharecropper in Mississippi. Never learned to read, never had anything that wasn't taken from him eventually. But he told me something when I was young. He said, "Son, they can take everything from you except your ability to stand up. And if you don't stand up when it matters, then you've given them that too." He turned back to face Park and Jenkins. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." "Name them," Park said. "First, Mrs. Chen gets help too. That eviction was illegal, and Brennan needs to face consequences. Second, this doesn't become just about me. Those 17 other complaints against Rollins, those people deserve justice too. Third, when this is over, win or lose, someone tells me who's really behind this, who that man was in the courthouse." Jenkins started to speak, but Park held up a hand. "I can't promise the third one, not yet. But the first two, absolutely." Luther nodded. "Then let's do this. But I need to go home first, get some things, check on Mrs. Chen." "I'll drive you," Jenkins said. "And Mr. Rowe, we'll have agents watching your building starting today. Discreetly, but they'll be there." The ride back to Luther's apartment was quiet. Jenkins drove himself no government car, just a plain sedan that blended in perfectly with the other vehicles on the street. As they pulled up to Luther's building, Jenkins handed him a card. "My direct number. Call any time, day or night. And Mr. Rowe, that was a brave thing you did yesterday." "Didn't feel brave," Luther said. "Felt like getting slapped in the face. Sometimes that's what bravery looks like." Luther climbed the stairs to his apartment slowly, his body feeling every one of his 72 years. He could hear Mrs. Chen's television through her door, the sound of a Chinese drama she liked to watch. He knocked gently. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. Her eyes were red from crying, and she gasped when she saw his face in full daylight. "Oh, Mr. Rowe, your poor face. It looks worse than it feels." He lied. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to listen. There are people who want to help us, lawyers, FBI even. They think what happened yesterday to both of us, it's part of something bigger." Her face crumpled. "It doesn't matter. I have to leave. 30 days. No, you don't. We're going to fight this, the real way this time in federal court where Judge Henley can't help them. But Mr. Brennan, he has so much power, so much money." Luther gently took her hands in his weathered ones. "You know what he doesn't have, the truth. And he doesn't have the FBI investigating him for corruption. Things are about to change, Mrs. Chen. I need you to trust me." She looked at him for a long moment, this elderly black man with his swollen face and cracked glasses, asking her to have faith when faith had gotten them both nothing but pain. "You stood up for me," she said finally, "when no one else would. Yes, I trust you." Luther squeezed her hands and then headed to his own apartment. He needed to pack a few things just in case Jenkins was right about the danger. As he opened his door, he noticed something immediately, a smell that didn't belong. Cigarette smoke, though Luther hadn't smoked in 20 years. He stepped inside carefully, his old instincts from Vietnam suddenly alive. The apartment looked normal, but small things were off. A drawer slightly open that he always kept closed. A picture frame moved half an inch. Someone had been here going through his things, leaving just enough evidence to let him know. His phone rang, making him jump. It was Jenkins. "Mr. Rowe, are you in your apartment?" "Yes, someone's been here." "I know. We saw them on the building security camera. 2 men picked your lock about an hour ago. They were inside for 12 minutes. Why didn't you stop them?" "Because now we have them on video committing a federal crime. breaking and entering attempted intimidation of a federal witness. They just added 5 years to their eventual sentences. Luther sank into his chair. They're trying to scare me. Are they succeeding? Luther thought about it. Was he scared? Yes. But was he going to stop? He looked at the picture they'd moved his wedding photo, him and Denise young and hopeful, ready to take on the world together. No, he said. They're not. Good. Pack what you need. We've arranged a safe house for tonight, just as a precaution. As Luther packed, he thought about how quickly things had escalated. Yesterday morning, he'd just been trying to help his neighbor. Now he was a federal witness in a corruption case, packing to leave his home because corrupt cops had already broken in to intimidate him. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed quiet, old man. Luther showed it to Jenkins when he came to pick him up. They're getting desperate already, Jenkins said. That's good. Desperate people make mistakes. The safe house was a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town. Clean, furnished, anonymous. Jenkins walked through it with him, showing him the security features, the panic button, the procedures. Try to get some rest, Jenkins said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. We're going to do a formal interview, get your whole statement on record. After Jenkins left, Luther sat in this strange apartment, his face throbbing, his world turned upside down. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in months. His son Marcus, who worked for some government agency in Detroit, always busy, always traveling. He almost called, then stopped. What would he say? That he'd been assaulted by a cop and was now in protective custody. Marcus would worry, might even try to come home. No better to wait until he had more to tell, until this was resolved one way or another. He didn't know that Marcus was at that very moment sitting in a hotel room 3 blocks away, reviewing surveillance footage, building the case that would destroy not just Rollins, but the entire network of corruption that had infected Winston Hill. Instead, Luther made himself a simple dinner, took his medication, and tried to watch television. But his mind kept returning to that moment in the courtroom, the crack of Rollins's hand across his face, the silence that followed. All those people who saw and did nothing. Tomorrow, he would start the process of making them all accountable. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. His phone rang. It was Park. Mr. Rowe, I wanted to check in. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Been through worse. I also wanted you to know Angela Martinez, the court reporter, who recorded the video. She's received 3 threatening phone calls tonight. She's not backing down. Luther felt a surge of admiration for this woman he'd never met. Is she safe? FBI is watching her too. Mr. Rowe, I need you to understand something. By tomorrow afternoon, this is going to be public. Once we file the federal suit, once the FBI officially announces their investigation, the media will pick it up. Your face, your name, your story, it's all going to be out there. Luther thought about his quiet life, his anonymous existence. That was about to end. I understand. Do you? Because once this starts, there's no going back. You'll be the face of this fight. Every racist in Winston Hill will know your name. Every cop who thinks like Rollins will see you as the enemy. Mr. Park. I'm 72 years old. I've been called names, been threatened, been dismissed and disrespected more times than I can count. If putting my face out there means that men like Rollins can't do this to anyone else, then it's worth it. Park was quiet for a moment. You're a remarkable man, Mr. Rowe. No, Luther said. I'm just tired of remarkable men getting away with evil. After he hung up, Luther stood by the window of the safe house, looking out at the unfamiliar street. Somewhere out there, Rollins was probably drinking with his buddies, laughing about how he'd put an old man in his place. Somewhere Judge Henley was probably at some political fundraiser, shaking hands and making deals. Somewhere Brennan was probably calculating how much he could charge for Mrs. Chen's apartment once she was gone. They all thought they'd won. They all thought Luther was just another victim who would disappear into silence and fear. They were wrong. Luther touched his swollen face gently. The bruising was spreading purple and yellow and green, a map of violence across his dark skin. But beneath the bruising, beneath the pain, something else was spreading too. Determination, purpose. The absolute conviction that this time, things would be different. He thought about his father, the sharecropper who never learned to read, but taught his son to stand. He thought about his wife Denise, who died 3 years ago after a lifetime of fighting for others, teaching in underfunded schools, organizing community programs, never backing down from a righteous fight. "I'm standing, baby," he said to her memory. "Just like you always told me to." His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. This time it was a photo his apartment building taken from across the street. The message said, "We know where you live." Luther forwarded it to Jenkins immediately, then typed a response to the unknown number. "I know where I live too, and I'll be back." He turned off his phone after that, not wanting to see whatever response might come. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight he needed rest, needed to gather his strength for the battle ahead. As he prepared for bed in this strange place, Luther thought about courage. He'd always thought of it as something dramatic, heroic, like the stories of soldiers charging into battle. But maybe real courage was quieter than that. Maybe it was an old man with a swollen face deciding to tell the truth. Maybe it was a court reporter secretly recording injustice. Maybe it was an FBI agent working for 3 years to build a case nobody wanted him to build. Maybe courage was just standing up when everyone else stayed seated, speaking when everyone else stayed silent, refusing to fall when someone tried to knock you down. The safe house was quiet. No familiar sounds of home. But Luther felt oddly at peace. Tomorrow the war would begin in earnest. But tonight he had done something that mattered. He had stood up. He had spoken truth. He had refused to fall. And somewhere in the city, forces were aligning: FBI agents, prosecutors, lawyers, witnesses, all brought together by one moment of violence that had been meant to silence him, but had instead become the spark that would burn down a kingdom of corruption. Luther Rowe, 72 years old, retired construction worker. Nobody special, closed his eyes and slept the sleep of the righteous. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. He was ready. Luther woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. The unfamiliar ceiling of the safe house reminded him immediately where he was and why. His face throbbed with a deep, constant ache that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. The caller was Jenkins. "Mr. Rowe, I apologize for the early hour. There's been a development. Can you be ready in 30 minutes? "What kind of development?" "The kind we discuss in person. I'll explain everything when I get there." Luther dressed carefully in the clothes he'd packed, his movements stiff from sleeping in an unfamiliar bed. His reflection in the bathroom mirror was worse than yesterday. The bruising had spread and darkened, giving him the appearance of a prize fighter who'd lost badly. He touched the swelling, gently wincing at the tenderness. Jenkins arrived precisely 30 minutes later, accompanied by a woman Luther hadn't met before. She was black, mid-40s, with natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Mr. Rowe, this is Assistant United States Attorney Patricia Williams. She'll be leading the prosecution." Williams shook Luther's hand firmly, her gaze direct and unflinching as she took in his injured face. "Mr. Rowe, I want you to know that what happened to you is being taken very seriously at the highest levels. The Attorney General himself has been briefed." Luther sat down slowly, his body protesting. "The Attorney General knows about an old man getting slapped. He knows about a pattern of civil rights violations that your case has brought to light," Williams said, taking a seat across from him. "Mr. Rowe, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room for the next—" She checked her watch. 4 hours. At 10 a.m. we're holding a press conference announcing federal charges against Lieutenant Rollins and 11 other members of the Winston Hill Police Department. Luther felt his chest tighten. 11 others. "Your assault was the key that unlocked everything," Jenkins explained. "Last night, 2 witnesses came forward independently. Officers who've been documenting misconduct for years but were afraid to speak up. When they saw what happened to you, saw that the FBI was involved, they decided it was time. Williams pulled out a tablet showing Luther a list of names and charges. Conspiracy to violate civil rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and in Rollins' case, assault on a federal witness. Federal witness. But I wasn't a federal witness when he hit me. No, but you became one, and he's been trying to intimidate you since. Those text messages, the break-in at your apartment, he didn't know we were already watching. He gave us everything we needed. Luther studied the list of names. He recognized some of them officers he'd seen around the neighborhood, names whispered in warning among the black community. What about Judge Henley? Williams and Jenkins exchanged glances. That's a more complicated situation. We're investigating, but judicial misconduct requires a different approach. For now, we're focusing on the immediate criminal violations. She sat there and watched, Luther said quietly. Watched him hit me and did nothing. I know. Williams said, her voice softening slightly. And that will be addressed. But we have to be strategic. These cases are built like pyramids. We start at the base and work our way up. Jenkins leaned forward. Mr. Rowe, the press conference is going to change everything. Your name, your face, your story. It's going to be everywhere. We need to move you to a more secure location, at least temporarily. I'm not hiding, Luther said firmly. I've done nothing wrong. It's not about hiding, Williams said. It's about safety. We have credible intelligence that some of Rollins' associates are planning retaliation. Let them come. Mr. Rowe, Williams said, her tone sharpening. I appreciate your courage, but we need you alive and well to testify. This isn't just about you anymore. Those 11 officers have hurt dozens of people. You're the voice for all of them now. Luther was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of that responsibility. Where would I go? Federal facility, about an hour outside the city. Comfortable, secure. You can have visitors make calls, but all monitored and controlled. It's temporary, just until we can assess and neutralize the immediate threats. How long? Maybe a week, possibly 2. Luther thought about Mrs. Chen alone and scared in the building. What about my neighbor? She's part of this too. We're relocating her as well, Jenkins said. She's agreed to testify about Brennan's connections to the police department. Mr. Rowe, I know this is overwhelming, but you've started something important here. Something that could change Winston Hill forever. At 9:45 a.m., Luther sat in a federal building conference room watching the press conference preparation on a monitor. The room was filling with reporters, cameras, microphones clustered on the podium like a bouquet of black flowers. He could see Williams checking her notes, adjusting the microphone. Marcus stood in the back of the room, still hidden in shadow, watching everything. He'd arrived an hour earlier, having driven through the night from Detroit. Jenkins didn't know he was there. Marcus had used his federal credentials to access the building through a different entrance. He needed to see this, needed to watch as the system that had protected men like Rollins finally turned against them. At exactly 10 a.m., Williams stepped to the podium. The room fell silent, except for the clicking of cameras. Good morning, I'm Patricia Williams, Assistant United States Attorney for the Western District. Today, the Department of Justice is announcing federal indictments against 12 members of the Winston Hill Police Department for conspiracy to violate civil rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, and multiple counts of obstruction of justice. The room erupted with questions, but Williams held up her hand. 3 days ago, Lieutenant Brent Rollins physically assaulted a 72-year-old man named Luther Rowe in open court. This assault, captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by dozens of people, was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of violence and intimidation that has plagued this community for years. She clicked a remote, and Luther's bruised face appeared on a screen behind her. There were gasps from some of the reporters. Mr. Rowe's only crime was trying to testify truthfully in a civil matter. For this, he was struck by a police officer who believed his badge made him untouchable. Lieutenant Rollins was wrong. Williams went on to outline the charges, the evidence, the scope of the investigation. She didn't mention the two officers who'd come forward. Their identities were being protected. But she made it clear that the FBI had been building this case for years. "This is not about one bad officer," she said. "This is about a system that enabled and protected multiple bad actors. That system ends today." The questions came fast and fierce. Was Judge Henley under investigation? Were there more indictments coming? What about the mayor's office, known to be close with police leadership? Williams handled them all with professional precision, giving away nothing that might compromise the ongoing investigation, while making it clear that this was just the beginning. Back in the conference room, Luther watched Rollins's world collapse in real time. His phone was buzzing constantly, calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number, but he didn't answer. Jenkins sat beside him, providing commentary. "Rollins was arrested an hour ago," Jenkins said. "Pulled right out of roll call in front of his entire shift. The others are being brought in now." "Is he in jail?" "Federal holding. His arraignment is this afternoon. Given the charges and the risk of flight or witness intimidation, we're requesting no bail." Luther thought about Rollins in a cell experiencing the powerlessness he'd inflicted on so many others. He waited to feel satisfaction, vindication, something. But all he felt was tired. "Mr. Rowe," Jenkins said, "there's someone here who wants to speak with you." The door opened and Angela Martinez entered. Luther recognized her from the courthouse, though they'd never spoken. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s, Latina, with determination written in every line of her posture. "Mr. Rowe," she said, "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For not speaking up in the moment. I sat there and recorded it, but I didn't say anything. I didn't try to stop it." Luther stood his movements careful and gently took her hands. "You did something. That's more than anyone else in that room can say. Your video is going to help put him away." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've worked in that courthouse for 8 years. I've seen things, heard things. But watching him hit you, seeing Judge Henley do nothing, I couldn't be silent anymore." "You're not silent now," Luther said. "That's what matters." After Angela left, Williams returned from the press conference looking energized. "It's done. The story's out there. Every major network is running it. Rollins' photo is everywhere." "What happens now?" Luther asked. "Now we build the case. We have your testimony, the videos, the witness statements. But we need more. We need to show the pattern, the conspiracy. That means going through every complaint, every suspicious arrest, every use of force report." "That could take months." "It will take months. But you've given us something we didn't have before: momentum, public attention, political pressure. The mayor's already called for a full review of the police department. The city council is holding emergency hearings." Luther's phone rang. It was a number he recognized, his son Marcus. He answered immediately. "Dad, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Why didn't you call me?" Luther heard the worry in his son's voice, the barely controlled anger. "I'm fine, son. It looks worse than it is. You were assaulted by a police officer. You're in federal protection." "How do you know about the protection?" There was a pause. "It's all over the news, Dad. They're saying you're the key witness in a federal corruption case. I'm coming home." "Marcus, you don't need to. I'm already on my way. I'll be there by tonight." The line went dead. Luther looked at the phone, wondering at his son's urgency. Marcus had always been protective, but this seemed different, more personal. Williams was watching him. "Your son?" "Yeah. He works for the government in Detroit. Some kind of analyst position." Williams and Jenkins exchanged another one of those looks that Luther was starting to recognize. They knew something they weren't saying. "Mr. Rowe," Jenkins said, "we need to move you to the secure facility now. We've had credible threats come in since the press conference." "What kind of threats?" "The kind that mention specific weapons and specific times. We're taking them seriously." As they prepared to leave, Luther looked out the window at Winston Hill spread below. The city looked different somehow, like something fundamental had shifted. Maybe it was just his imagination, but he could swear he could feel the change in the air, the sense that long-hidden things were being dragged into the light. The ride to the federal facility was in an unmarked van with bulletproof glass and 2 escort vehicles. Luther felt like a criminal being transported, even though he'd done nothing wrong. The facility itself looked like an upscale apartment complex from the outside, but Luther could see the cameras, the reinforced windows, the subtle security measures. His temporary home was a small suite bedroom living area kitchenette. Better than many hotels he'd stayed in, but still unmistakably a cage, no matter how comfortable. "Your son can visit tomorrow," Jenkins said. "We'll need to clear him first, but given his government employment, that should be straightforward." After Jenkins left, Luther sat in the silence of his new prison. He turned on the television, and his own face stared back at him. The bruising looked even worse on screen, purple and green and yellow, under the harsh lights of the news cameras. The headline read, "Elderly veteran assaulted by police becomes key witness in federal corruption case." They were calling him a hero. Social media was exploding with outrage over what had happened. The video of Rollins hitting him had been viewed over 1 million times in just 2 hours. There were protests being organized, demands for justice, calls for the entire police department to be investigated. Luther changed the channel, not wanting to see anymore. But every news station was covering it. His face, his story, his moment of violence broadcast to the world. His phone rang. It was Mrs. Chen calling from her own protective location. "Mr. Rowe, I saw the news. You're famous." "I didn't want to be famous, Mrs. Chen. I just wanted to help you keep your apartment." "You did help. The lawyer, Mr. Park, he says now that the FBI is involved, Brennan won't dare evict me. He's being investigated too." That was something at least. One good thing coming from all this chaos. As the day wore on, Luther watched the dominoes fall. The mayor held a press conference distancing himself from the accused officers. The police union initially defended Rollins, then went silent as more evidence emerged. By evening, 3 city councilors were calling for Judge Henley's resignation. At 7 p.m., there was a knock on his door. Luther opened it to find Marcus standing there, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus looked at his father's bruised face, and something shifted in his expression, a hardening, a resolve. "Dad," Marcus said, and pulled him into a careful hug. They sat together in the small living room, Luther telling the story from the beginning. Mrs. Chen's troubles, the trial, the slap, everything that had followed. Marcus listened without interrupting, though Luther could see his hands clenching and unclenching. "I should have been here," Marcus said when Luther finished. "You couldn't have known." "I should have been here anyway. Should have visited more, should have—" "Son, stop. You've got your own life, your own work. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Marcus looked at him strangely. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." But before he could continue, Luther's phone rang. It was Williams. "Mr. Rowe, I need to inform you of something. Lieutenant Rollins made bail." Luther felt his stomach drop. "How, you said no bail?" His lawyer argued that he's not a flight risk, has ties to the community. The judge, not Henley, a different one, set bail at $500,000. The police union posted it within an hour. "So he's out there?" "Yes, but with conditions. Ankle monitor, no contact with witnesses, suspended from the force. Mr. Rowe, we have agents watching him. If he comes within 1,000 feet of you, he goes right back to jail." After Luther hung up, he found Marcus staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. "He's out," Luther said simply. "I heard." Marcus stood up, pacing to the window. "Dad, the man in the courthouse, the one who made sure you got to your car safely? You know who he was?" Marcus turned back to face him. "Yeah, I know." Luther waited, but Marcus didn't elaborate. Finally, Luther asked, "Are you going to tell me?" "Not yet, but soon. Right now I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Luther studied his son's face. There was something different about him, something harder and more focused than the mild-mannered analyst Luther thought he knew. "I've always trusted you, son." Marcus nodded. "Good. Because things are about to get complicated. Rollins being out on bail, that's not good. He's desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things. The FBI is watching him." Marcus smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, they are. But that might not be enough." Before Luther could ask what he meant, Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his expression darkened. "What is it?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Look, I have to go handle something, but I'll be back tomorrow. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Jenkins or Williams." Marcus. "Please, Dad, just trust me." After Marcus left, Luther sat alone in the protective custody suite, wondering what his son wasn't telling him. On the television, the news continued its cycle. His face, Rollins's face, the courthouse video playing over and over. Protesters had gathered outside the Winston Hill Police Department demanding justice. Counter-protesters, thin blue line flags waving, had assembled across the street. The battle lines were being drawn. The city was choosing sides. And at the center of it all was Luther Rowe, 72 years old, bruised and tired, who had just wanted to help his neighbor. As night fell, he thought about Rollins out there somewhere free on bail, probably planning his next move. He thought about Judge Henley, probably consulting with her own lawyers. He thought about all the people who'd been victimized over the years watching the news and wondering if this time finally justice might prevail. His phone rang one more time, an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Mr. Rowe." The voice was familiar, but he couldn't place it. "This is Officer Daniel Reeves. I was in the courtroom that day. I watched what Rollins did to you." Luther remembered him now, one of the younger officers who'd been sitting with Rollins and the others. "What do you want?" "To apologize. And to tell you that not all of us are like him. Some of us joined the force to actually help people. What he did was wrong, and I should have said something." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't. I was a coward. But I'm talking to the FBI now, telling them everything I know. It's not much, but it's something." "Why are you calling me?" There was a long pause. "Because my grandmother is about your age, Mr. Rowe, and when I saw him hit you, all I could think about was someone doing that to her. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." After Reeves hung up, Luther sat in the darkness for a while processing this. Another crack in the blue wall. Another person choosing courage over comfort. The secure facility was quiet around him, but Luther could feel the storm building outside. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more accusations, more upheaval. The machine that had protected men like Rollins was breaking down gear by gear, piece by piece. But machines didn't break themselves. It took people, ordinary people, doing extraordinary things. A court reporter secretly recording. Young officers finally speaking up. An old man refusing to fall when struck. Luther touched his bruised face one more time, feeling the swelling that was finally starting to go down. In a strange way, he was grateful for it. This visible proof of injustice that couldn't be denied or explained away. Rollins had meant to silence him with that slap. Instead, he'd given Luther a voice that was now being heard across the country. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tomorrow Marcus would return, and maybe Luther would finally learn what his son was hiding. Tomorrow the investigation would deepen, more arrests would likely follow, and the city would continue its reckoning. But tonight, Luther Rowe sat in protective custody, an unlikely catalyst for change, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just for himself, but for his city, for all the people who'd been silenced and dismissed and struck down. Change was coming to Winston Hill. It had started with a slap, but it wouldn't end there. It would end with justice. The morning brought an unexpected visitor. Luther had just finished his coffee when Jenkins arrived, his usual composed demeanor replaced with visible tension. "Mr. Rowe, there's been a development. Rollins's lawyer filed a motion claiming you provoked the assault. They're saying you were aggressive, threatening that Rollins acted in self-defense. Luther set down his cup carefully. Self-defense. The man outweighed me by 60 pounds, and I'm 72 years old. They're going to try to paint you as a radical and agitator with a history of anti-police sentiment. They've subpoenaed records from your 1971 arrest. Jenkins paused. They're also claiming you have a personal vendetta against law enforcement because of your son. My son, Marcus. He's a government analyst. What does he have to do with... Jenkins pulled out a tablet showing Luther a document. Mr. Rowe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you know your son is a federal agent? The words hung in the air like smoke. Luther stared at Jenkins, trying to process what he'd just heard. That's not... Marcus works in Detroit. He analyzes data for... He's FBI Mr. Rowe. Special Agent Marcus Rowe. He's been with the Bureau for 12 years. Luther sank into his chair, his mind racing through every conversation, every visit, every excuse Marcus had made for missing holidays and birthdays. He lied to me. He was protecting you, and himself. Undercover agents often maintain cover stories even with family. Jenkins sat down across from him. The reason I'm telling you this now is because Rollins's lawyer somehow found out. They're going to claim this whole thing was a setup, that you deliberately provoked Rollins knowing your son would pursue federal charges. Luther felt anger rising in his chest, not at Marcus, but at the situation. My son wasn't even in town when Rollins hit me. Actually, Jenkins hesitated. He was. He arrived that morning and was in the courthouse. He saw the whole thing. The room seemed to spin slightly. Luther gripped the arms of his chair. He saw it happen. He watched that man hit me and didn't. He couldn't reveal himself. He was there observing part of our ongoing investigation. If he'd intervened, it would have blown 3 years of work. Luther stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the world continued as normal cars passing people, walking life moving forward, while his understanding of everything shifted. 3 years, he said quietly. You've been investigating for 3 years, and my son has been part of it. He's been lead agent for the last 18 months. Mr. Rowe Marcus has been meticulous about keeping you separate from the investigation. What happened in that courtroom, your decision to testify for Mrs. Chen Rollins's assault, none of that was planned. It was coincidence. Coincidence? Luther laughed bitterly. My son has been lying to me for years, and it's coincidence that I ended up in the middle of his case. There was a knock at the door. Jenkins checked his phone, then stood. That's him now. Marcus entered, and father and son stared at each other across the room. Luther could see it now, the way Marcus carried himself, the observant eyes, the controlled movements. How had he missed it for so long? Dad, 12 years, Luther said. 12 years of lies. Not lies, protection. Marcus stepped forward, but Luther held up a hand. Don't. Just... give me a minute. Marcus nodded, sitting down, while maintaining distance. When Luther finally looked at him again, he saw not the confident federal agent, but his son, looking as uncertain as he had as a child caught in a misdeed. Explain, Luther said simply. Marcus took a breath. When I joined the Bureau, they recommended I maintain a cover story with everyone, including family. It's standard procedure for agents who might work undercover. The data analyst story wasn't completely false. I do analyze data. I just also do a lot more. And Winston Hill. I requested this assignment when I learned about the corruption here. I've been building the case piece by piece. I knew Rollins was dirty, knew about his connection to Brennan, but we needed something concrete, something undeniable. And then I walked into the middle of it. Marcus's composure cracked slightly. When Mrs. Chen called me that morning, told me you were testifying, I broke every protocol. I shouldn't have gone to that courthouse, but I couldn't stay away. You were walking into a situation with corrupt cops and a compromised judge, and you had no idea how dangerous it was. "So you watched," Luther said, and there was no accusation in it, just statement of fact. "You watched him hit me." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done." Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Every instinct, every part of me wanted to intervene. But if I'd revealed myself as FBI, the entire investigation would have collapsed. Rollins would have walked, and he would have kept hurting people." Luther considered this feeling the weight of 3 years of investigation balanced against a father's protection. "The man who helped me to the car. That was me. I couldn't reveal myself, but I could make sure you were safe. And the lawyer Park. I called him. He did owe me a favor. I helped his brother with a federal case 2 years ago." Luther walked back to his chair, sitting down heavily. The bruising on his face had faded to yellow and green, but it still ached when he moved certain ways. "What else don't I know?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Luther a photo. It was Rollins meeting with 2 men Luther didn't recognize. "These are Carter and Diego Morales, brothers who run most of the drug trade in East Winston Hill. Rollins has been protecting their operation for 5 years, taking a cut of their profits." Another photo, Judge Henley at a restaurant with Brennan and several other landlords. Henley's been fixing cases for them. Evictions, code violations, assault charges against tenants who complain. She's received over $200,000 in campaign contributions from shell companies they control. More photos, more connections, a web of corruption that seemed to touch every part of Winston Hill's power structure. Luther felt overwhelmed by the scope of it. "We were close to moving on them," Marcus continued. "Maybe another 6 months. But when you got hit, when we had it on video with multiple witnesses, we couldn't wait. You gave us the probable cause we needed to accelerate everything." "So I was useful," Luther said dryly. "Dad, no. That's not—" Marcus stopped choosing his words carefully. "You stood up for what was right, not knowing any of this. That's more courage than most people ever show. The fact that it helped our case. That's just the universe working in mysterious ways." Jenkins, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Mr. Rowe, I understand this is a lot to process, but we need to focus on the immediate threat. Rollins' bail conditions require him to stay away from you, but we've intercepted communications suggesting he might not comply." "You tapped his phone." "Legal wiretap approved by a federal judge," Marcus said. "He's been talking to the Morales brothers. They're worried about their operation being exposed. There's been discussion of silencing potential witnesses." Luther felt a chill. "Mrs. Chen? She's safe. We have agents with her. But you're the public face of this case now. You're the one they see as the biggest threat." Luther stood again, this time with purpose. "Then let them come. I'm tired of hiding." "Dad." "No, Marcus. I've been in this safe house for 2 days while that man walks free. I'm supposed to testify to the grand jury tomorrow. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going home." "That's not wise," Jenkins said. "Maybe not. But it's necessary. If I hide, if I show fear, then everyone else who might come forward will stay silent. Someone needs to show that we won't be intimidated." Marcus and Jenkins exchanged glances. Then Marcus said, "If you're going to do this, you're going to do it with protection. Full surveillance panic button and someone with you at all times." "Not you," Luther said firmly. "Your cover's blown now anyway, but I won't have my son as my bodyguard. It's bad enough you've been lying to me for 12 years. The hurt in Marcus's eyes was plain, but he nodded. "I understand." That afternoon, Luther was driven to the federal courthouse for grand jury preparation. Williams met him in a secure conference room, spreading out documents and photographs. "They're going to ask you about everything," she said. "The assault, what you observed about Brennan's harassment of Mrs. Chen, any previous interactions with Rollins or other officers. Answer truthfully, completely, and don't elaborate beyond what you're asked." "I know how to tell the truth, Ms. Williams." She smiled slightly. "I know you do. That's what scares them. As they reviewed his testimony, William's phone rang. She listened, her expression darkening. "When is everyone secure?" "Good. Keep me updated." She hung up and turned to Luther. "There's been an incident. Someone threw a brick through Mrs. Chen's apartment window. She wasn't there. She's still in protective custody, but the message was clear. They're trying to intimidate us. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that?" Luther thought about his quiet life before all this, the simple routine of retirement. That was gone now, probably forever. "I've been prepared my whole life, Ms. Williams. I just didn't know it until now." That evening, back in the safe house, Luther found himself unable to sleep. He stood at the window watching the city lights when his phone rang. The caller ID showed his daughter's name, Denise Jr., named for her mother, living in California, now with his grandchildren. "Daddy, I just saw the news. My God, your face." "I'm okay, baby. It looks worse than it is." "Why didn't you call me?" "I had to find out from the news that my father was assaulted by a police officer." He could hear the tears in her voice, the fear and anger mixed together. "I didn't want to worry you." "Not worry me, Daddy. They're saying you're in protective custody, that there are death threats." "Denise, listen to me. I'm safe. The FBI is protecting me. I'm going to testify, and then this will all be over." "Will it? Because from here, it looks like you've made enemies of some very dangerous people." Luther didn't have a good answer for that. Instead, he said, "Do you remember what your mother used to say about standing up?" There was a pause. Then Denise's voice softened. "That if you don't stand up when it matters, you'll spend your whole life on your knees." She was right. This matters, baby. What they did to me, what they've been doing to people in this community for years, someone has to stand up. But why does it have to be you? Because I was there. Because I saw it happening. Because if not me, then who? After they hung up, Luther sat in the darkness, thinking about Denise Sr. She would have been proud, he thought, but also worried. She'd always been the brave one, the one who marched and protested and spoke truth to power. He'd been the quiet one supporting her, but rarely taking the lead. Now he was alone, carrying on her fight in his own way. The next morning came too quickly. Luther, dressed in his best remaining suit, the navy one, was still blood-stained and prepared for the grand jury. Marcus arrived to check on him, their interaction still strained from yesterday's revelations. "Dad, I wanted to say, not now," Luther said, not unkindly. "We'll talk about it after all this is over. Right now, I need to focus on what I'm about to do." Marcus nodded. "Just be careful. Grand jury proceedings are secret, but Rollins has friends everywhere. Someone might leak what you say. Then they'll hear the truth." The federal courthouse was a fortress of concrete and glass surrounded by security. Luther was brought in through an underground entrance, avoiding the media circus out front. The grand jury room was smaller than he'd expected, just 23 citizens sitting in curved rows like a tiny amphitheater. Williams led him through his testimony methodically. He described the morning in question, Mrs. Chen's troubles with Brennan, his attempt to provide evidence, Judge Henley's dismissal, and then the assault itself. "Can you describe the force of the blow?" Williams asked. "Hard enough to knock my glasses off, split my lip, bloody my nose. Hard enough that I saw stars for a moment." "What did Lieutenant Rollins say after he struck you?" Luther closed his eyes, remembering. "He said I was lucky, that's all I got. That in his day, they knew how to deal with troublemakers like me." "What did you take that to mean?" "That in his day, they could have done worse to a black man who spoke up. That they could have killed me." There were murmurs from the grand jury. Williams continued walking him through the aftermath, the threats, the break-in, the intimidation attempts. "Mr. Rowe," one grand juror asked during the question period, "why did you decide to speak up in that courtroom, knowing the risk?" Luther looked at the juror, a middle-aged white woman with kind eyes. "Ma'am, I'm 72 years old. I've been silent through a lot of injustice in my life, told myself it wasn't my problem, wasn't my fight. But watching them railroad Mrs. Chen, seeing how scared she was, how alone I couldn't be silent anymore. At my age, what's the worst they could do to me? That time isn't already doing. But they did hurt you. Yes, ma'am, they did. But I'm still here. I'm still talking. And maybe because I am the next person won't get hurt. The testimony continued for 3 hours. By the end, Luther was exhausted, his face throbbing from the stress. As he was led out, Williams pressed his shoulder gently. You did beautifully. The grand jury was completely engaged. I'd be shocked if they don't return indictments on all counts. Outside, the media had multiplied. Despite taking the underground exit, somehow word had leaked that Luther was there. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Luther kept his head up, letting them see his healing, but still visible bruises. Back at the safe house, Luther found Marcus waiting. The grand jury just returned the indictments, Marcus said. All 12 officers plus 3 more they added based on testimony from the cooperating witnesses. It's happening, Dad. They're all going down. Luther sat down heavily. What about Henley? Judicial Review Board is opening an investigation. She'll likely be removed from the bench, possibly disbarred. And Brennan. Federal tax evasion charges plus conspiracy. The properties he's been acquiring through intimidation, that's a RICO predicate. Luther didn't fully understand all the legal terms, but he understood the result. The system that had protected these men was turning on them. That night, Luther made a decision. Despite protests from Marcus and Jenkins, he insisted on returning to his apartment the next day. I need to go home, he said simply. I need to show them I'm not afraid. Dad, that's exactly what Rollins wants. For you to be exposed vulnerable. Then we'll be ready for him. Marcus studied his father's face, seeing the determination there. You're just like Mom. You know that stubborn as hell when you think you're right. She was usually right, Luther said with a small smile. I learned from the best. The return to his apartment building the next day was surreal. Media vans lined the street. Neighbors came out to greet him, some crying, some applauding. Mrs. Chen rushed out, embracing him carefully. Mr. Rowe, you're home. We're both home, Mrs. Chen. They can't push us out. But as Luther climbed the stairs to his apartment, he noticed things had changed. New locks on his door cameras in the hallway, and a young man in casual clothes reading a newspaper who was obviously FBI. Inside his apartment had been cleaned, the evidence of the break-in removed. But it didn't feel the same. The violation lingered like a smell he couldn't quite wash out. That night, unable to sleep, Luther stood at his window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Rollins was probably planning something. The Morales brothers were certainly discussing their options. Judge Henley was consulting with lawyers. The war wasn't over. In many ways, it had just begun. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Surveillance shows 3 vehicles circling your block. Stay away from windows. Luther stepped back, but didn't retreat to his bedroom. If they wanted to intimidate him, they would have to do better than driving in circles. Another text, this one from Williams. Grand jury returned 15 additional indictments today based on new witness testimony. Your courage started an avalanche. Luther allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then his phone rang, unknown number. You think you've won, old man? The voice was unfamiliar, young, aggressive. This ain't over. Rollins got friends. We know where you live, where your daughter lives in California, where those pretty grandkids go to school. If you touch my family, you'll what? You're just one old man who got lucky, but luck runs out. The line went dead. Luther immediately called Marcus, who answered on the first ring. They just threatened Denise and the kids. We heard. The call's been traced. Dad, this is good. It's another federal charge. Threatening a federal witness's family. I don't care about charges. I care about my daughter. Already handled. Federal marshals are with them now. They're safe, Dad. I promise. Luther sank into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 72 years. The weight of what he'd started was crushing. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone connected to him, everyone who might be pulled into the crossfire. But then he thought about all the others who'd been threatened over the years and had no FBI protection, no federal marshals, no recourse at all. They'd lived in fear while men like Rollins operated with impunity. No more. Luther stood up, walked to his window, despite the earlier warning, and looked out at the circling vehicles. Let them see him. Let them know he wasn't hiding. One of the vehicles stopped directly below. A figure got out, looked up, and even from 3 stories, Luther could see it was Rollins. They stared at each other across the distance, predator and prey reversed from their positions in the courtroom. Rollins raised his hand in a mock salute, then got back in the vehicle and drove away. Luther's phone immediately rang. Marcus. What the hell are you doing? I told you to stay away from the windows. He needed to see that I'm not afraid. Dad being brave and being reckless are 2 different things. Your mother used to say the same thing, Luther said softly. Usually right before she did something reckless anyway. Marcus sighed audibly. The marshals will be there in 10 minutes to take you back to protective custody. No. Dad. I said no, Marcus. I'm done hiding. If Rollins wants to escalate, let him. Every move he makes just adds to the charges against him. You're not bait, Dad. Aren't I? Isn't that what this has always been about? Drawing them out, making them reveal themselves? There was a long silence. Then Marcus said, Not to me. To me, you're just my father, and I'm trying to keep you safe. I know, son, but safe isn't the same as right. You should know that better than anyone, given what you've been doing for 12 years. After they hung up, Luther made himself tea, his hands steady despite everything. He thought about tomorrow, more testimony, more threats, probably more pressure to back down. But he also thought about the 15 new indictments, the other witnesses finding courage, the system slowly grinding toward justice. He'd started something that couldn't be stopped now, even if they silenced him. The thought was oddly comforting. As he prepared for bed, Luther touched the last of the bruising on his face. It barely hurt now, just a dull ache that reminded him of that moment in the courtroom when everything changed. Rollins had meant to put him in his place. Instead, he'd set him free. Free from the silence that had constrained him for decades. Free from the fear that had kept so many quiet for so long. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. But tonight, Luther Rowe slept in his own bed in his own apartment, while federal agents kept watch and the wheels of justice slowly turned. The old man who'd been slapped down was still standing, and he wasn't alone anymore. The explosion happened at 3:17 a.m., rattling Luther from sleep and sending him rolling instinctively to the floor. Old military reflexes die hard. The sound came from somewhere below, followed by car alarms and shouting. Luther crawled to his window, staying low, and peered out to see Mrs. Chen's apartment window blown out, smoke billowing into the night air. His phone was already ringing. Marcus, the FBI surveillance team, everyone calling at once. Luther answered Marcus first. I'm okay, he said before his son could ask. But Mrs. Chen's apartment? She's not there, Dad. Remember, she's still in protective custody. That bomb was meant as a message. Luther stood slowly, his knees protesting. Through the smoke, he could see neighbors pouring out of the building in their nightclothes, frightened and confused. Sirens were already approaching. They're escalating, Marcus said. We're moving you now. No arguments. This time, Luther didn't fight it. A bombing was different from threats and intimidation. This was terrorism, plain and simple. Within minutes, FBI agents were at his door, escorting him out through the chaos. As they passed Mrs. Chen's destroyed apartment, Luther saw the devastation. Everything she owned, her lifetime of memories, reduced to ash and debris. At the federal building, Williams was waiting, despite the early hour, her usually perfect composure cracked with exhaustion and anger. This changes everything, she said. Bombing a residential building, Rollins just graduated from corruption to domestic terrorism. Every federal agency is going to come down on him now. You're sure it was him? Luther asked. Who else would it be? The Morales brothers might be drug dealers, but they're not stupid enough to blow up an apartment building. This has Rollins' desperation all over it. Jenkins entered holding a tablet. Security footage from a bodega 2 blocks away. Want to guess who was parked there 30 minutes before the explosion? The image was grainy, but clear enough. Rollins's pickup truck and a figure that looked like him talking to someone in another vehicle. Is that enough to arrest him? Luther asked. It's enough to bring him in for questioning, Williams said. And once we do that, we'll get a warrant to search his property. If there's any bomb-making material, any evidence at all, he's done. Luther thought about all his neighbors, the families with children who'd been terrified in the night. How many people could have been killed if Mrs. Chen had been home? The bomb squad says it was meant to destroy, not necessarily kill. But in an old building like that with gas lines and everything, could have taken out the whole floor. Marcus arrived an hour later looking haggard. He'd been up all night coordinating the response. Dad, we need to talk about long-term protection. This isn't going to end with Rollins' arrest. You think he's working with others? I know he is. The Morales brothers have too much to lose if he talks. And there are other cops, ones we haven't identified yet, who are just as dirty. You've become the symbol of their downfall. That makes you a target. Luther felt the weight of that responsibility. So what do you suggest? Witness protection. New identity, new location at least until after the trials. No. Luther's response was immediate and firm. I'm not disappearing. That's what they want for me to vanish, for this all to go away quietly. Dad, they tried to blow up a building to send you a message. And the message I'm sending back is that I'm not running. Luther stood pacing to the window. The sun was rising over Winston Hill, painting the city in deceptively peaceful colors. Your mother wouldn't have run. Marcus's expression softened. Mom also died of cancer at 68. She didn't get the chance to see you become this symbol of resistance. She would have been proud though, wouldn't she? She would have been terrified, Marcus admitted. But yes, proud too. Williams interrupted their conversation. Mr. Rowe, there's something else. The media has gotten wind of the bombing. They're connecting it to your case. By noon, this is going to be national news again. Luther nodded. He'd ceased being a private citizen days ago. Now he was public property. His every move scrutinized his safety, a matter of public concern. I want to make a statement, he said suddenly. Williams and Marcus exchanged glances. That might not be wise, Williams started. They tried to destroy Mrs. Chen's home because she dared to fight back because I dared to help her. If I stay silent now, they win. Luther turned to face them. Set up a press conference. I want to speak. The press conference was arranged for 2 p.m. on the steps of the federal courthouse. Against all security advice, Luther insisted on appearing in person rather than via video. The crowd that gathered was massive media protesters, supporters, and somewhere in that mass, probably people who wished him harm. Luther stood at the podium, his healing face visible to all the cameras, and began to speak without notes. 3 days ago, someone bombed my neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Chen immigrated to this country 40 years ago, worked hard all her life, and wanted nothing more than to keep her home. For that crime, someone tried to destroy everything she owned. He paused, scanning the crowd. They want us to be afraid. They want us to be silent. They want us to accept that this is just how things are in Winston Hill. But I'm 72 years old, and I'm tired of being told what to accept. The crowd was absolutely silent, hanging on every word. Lieutenant Rollins hit me because he thought he could, because he'd done it before to others who couldn't fight back. But he made a mistake. He hit me in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, in a way that couldn't be denied or covered up. And now his whole world is crumbling, so he's lashing out like a wounded animal. Someone in the crowd shouted, "We're with you, Mr. Rowe." Luther nodded toward the voice. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been abused by those in power and told to keep quiet about it. It's about every family forced from their home by corrupt landlords and crooked cops. It's about a system that protects the powerful and punishes the weak. He gripped the podium edges, his knuckles tight. They can threaten me, they can bomb buildings, they can try everything in their power to silence me. But I'm still standing. And as long as I'm standing, I'm going to keep telling the truth. The crowd erupted in applause. Luther stepped back from the podium, and Marcus was immediately at his side, guiding him through the mass of people reaching out to touch him, thank him, bless him. In the car afterward, Marcus was tense. "That was powerful, Dad, but you just painted an even bigger target on your back." "Good," Luther said. "Let them come at me in the open instead of sneaking around in the dark." That evening, the arrest happened. Luther watched on the news as FBI agents surrounded Rollins' house as the man who'd seemed so untouchable was led out in handcuffs. Rollins looked directly at the cameras, his expression murderous, and Luther knew this wasn't over. Williams called immediately after. "We found bomb-making materials in his garage, same type used in the apartment bombing. He's being held without bail this time. No judge is going to let him out after this." "What about the others, the Morales brothers?" "That's complicated. We need more evidence connecting them directly, but we're working on it." Over the next few days, Luther settled into a strange routine. He couldn't return to his building, it was still a crime scene, so he remained in the federal safe house. Marcus visited daily, their relationship slowly healing as they talked about the years of deception. "I wanted to tell you so many times," Marcus said one evening, "especially after Mom died. You were so alone, and I couldn't even be honest about who I was." "You were protecting me," Luther said. "I understand that now. Doesn't mean I like it, but I understand it. When I saw him hit you in that courtroom," Marcus's voice cracked slightly, "it took everything I had not to blow my cover right there. Not as an agent, but as your son." Luther reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "But you didn't because you knew the bigger picture. That's what your mother would have called strategic patience. She would have also called it being too clever for your own good." They both laughed, the first real moment of lightness between them since everything began. That night, Luther received an unexpected visitor. Angela Martinez, the court reporter who'd recorded the assault, came to the safe house with Williams. "Mr. Rowe," she said, "I wanted to thank you. Your courage in speaking out, it inspired others. 12 more people have come forward with complaints against various officers, people who were too scared before." "That's good," Luther said, though he felt the weight of being an inspiration. Angela continued, "I also wanted you to know that Judge Henley submitted her resignation today. She's trying to get ahead of the disbarment proceedings." Luther felt no satisfaction in this news, just a tired acknowledgement that one more piece of the corrupt system was falling. "What about you? You took a risk recording that video." "I've gotten death threats," Angela admitted, "but also job offers from major news organizations. Turns out being a whistleblower can open doors even as it closes others." After she left, Luther sat with Williams to prepare for Rollins' trial, which had been fast-tracked given the bombing charges. "His lawyer is going to come at you hard," Williams warned. "They're going to try to make you look like a troublemaker, an agitator. They'll bring up your arrest from 1971, try to paint you as anti-police." "I am anti-bad police," Luther said. "There's a difference. Make sure you articulate that difference on the stand. The jury needs to see you as reasonable, credible, sympathetic." "I'm just going to tell the truth, Ms. Williams, same as always." Williams smiled slightly. "That's what scares them most." The trial began 2 weeks later. Luther was the prosecution's star witness, and the courtroom was packed. This time, federal marshals were present, their eyes scanning constantly for threats. Luther recognized some faces in the gallery: neighbors, community activists, other victims of police corruption who'd found courage to come forward. He also saw Rollins sitting at the defense table in a suit that couldn't quite hide the thuggishness underneath. Their eyes met briefly, and Rollins mouthed something that looked like "dead man." Luther didn't react. He'd faced down worse than Brent Rollins in his 72 years. On the stand, Luther told his story again, but this time with the full context, the pattern of harassment against Mrs. Chen, the connections between Brennan and the police, the systematic targeting of vulnerable tenants. Mr. Rowe, Rollins' lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Peterson, began his cross-examination. Isn't it true that you have a history of anti-police activism? I have a history of standing up for civil rights, if that's what you mean. You were arrested in 1971 for disturbing the peace. I was arrested for trying to integrate a public swimming pool. The peace I was disturbing was the peace of segregation. There were murmurs in the courtroom. Peterson tried a different approach. Your son is an FBI agent, correct? I recently learned that, yes. And isn't it convenient that right after you're assaulted, the FBI suddenly takes interest in this case? Luther looked directly at the jury. My son kept his profession secret from me for 12 years. I had no idea he was FBI when Lieutenant Rollins hit me. But even if I had known, would that make it acceptable for a police officer to assault a 72-year-old man in open court? Peterson struggled to regain momentum. You've become something of a celebrity through all this, haven't you? Media appearances? Public support? I've become a target, Luther corrected. Someone bombed my neighbor's apartment. I've received death threats. My family has had to go into hiding. If this is celebrity, you can keep it. The prosecution presented the video evidence next. The courtroom watched in silence as Rollins struck Luther, the casual violence of it shocking even on repeated viewing. Then came the bombing evidence, the materials found in Rollins' garage, the surveillance footage, the pattern of escalation. On the third day of testimony, something unexpected happened. Officer Daniel Reeves, the young cop who'd called Luther to apologize, took the stand as a surprise prosecution witness. Officer Reeves, Williams asked, can you tell us about Lieutenant Rollins' behavior in the department? Reeves, looking nervous but determined, began to speak. He ran what he called the collection crew, officers who would provide protection for certain criminal enterprises in exchange for payment. He tried to recruit me when I first joined the force. What happened when you refused? I was assigned the worst shifts, the most dangerous calls. He made it clear that you were either with him or against him. Did you report this? Reeves glanced at Judge Henley's empty chair. A different judge was presiding now. I tried, but complaints against Rollins had a way of disappearing. The defense fought back hard, bringing character witnesses who painted Rollins as a dedicated officer, a protector of the community. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video, the bombing materials, the testimony of multiple officers who'd finally found the courage to speak up. During a recess, Luther encountered Rollins in the hallway. Despite the marshal's presence, Rollins leaned close and whispered, "This ain't over, old man. I got friends you don't even know about." Luther looked him in the eye. "So do I. The difference is, mine aren't going to prison." The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. Luther sat in the courtroom, Marcus beside him, for the first time publicly acknowledging their relationship. Mrs. Chen was there too, having returned from protective custody, clutching Luther's hand as the foreman stood. On the count of assault on a federal witness, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of domestic terrorism, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts continued 12 counts in all. Rollins didn't react until the end when he suddenly stood and pointed at Luther. "You think you won?" he shouted. "You destroyed everything. 40 years of protecting this city, and you destroyed it for what? So some old Chinese lady can keep her apartment." The marshals restrained him, but he kept shouting. "You have no idea what you've done. The Morales brothers, the gangs, all the people we kept in check, they're going to tear this city apart, and it's on you, Rowe. It's all on you." As Rollins was dragged out, Luther felt Mrs. Chen's hand tighten on his. "Is he right?" she whispered. "Did we make things worse?" Luther thought about it, then shook his head. "A corrupt peace is no peace at all. Whatever comes next, at least it'll be honest." The sentencing was set for 2 weeks later. In that time, the dominoes continued to fall. 7 more officers were arrested. The Morales brothers were indicted on federal drug charges, their protection gone with Rollins. Judge Henley was disbarred and faced criminal charges of her own. Brennan lost his properties to federal asset forfeiture. The night before sentencing, Marcus came to the safe house with news. "The Attorney General wants to meet you," he said. "You've become a symbol of something bigger than just this case. He wants to talk about systemic reform using Winston Hill as a model for addressing police corruption nationwide." Luther laughed a dry sound. "6 weeks ago, I was just trying to help my neighbor. Now I'm meeting with the Attorney General. You changed things, Dad. Your courage changed everything." "It wasn't courage," Luther said quietly. "It was just exhaustion. I was tired of being afraid, tired of being silent, tired of watching wrong win." The sentencing hearing was packed. Luther sat in the front row as the judge, a federal judge brought in from another district to avoid any appearance of bias, pronounced Rollins' fate. "Lieutenant Brent Rollins, you took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, you used your badge as a shield for criminal activity and a weapon against those you deemed powerless. The assault on Mr. Rowe was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of abuse of power." The judge paused, looking directly at Rollins. "You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison." There were gasps in the courtroom. 25 years. Rollins would be an old man if he survived his sentence. As court was dismissed, Luther stood to leave, but someone called his name. He turned to see a group of people he didn't recognize. Black, white, Latino, Asian, all ages, all watching him with something like hope. "Mr. Rowe," one woman said, "we're from the neighborhoods Rollins terrorized. We just wanted to say thank you. You did what none of us could do. You stood up to him and won." Luther felt the weight of their gratitude and their expectations. "We all won," he said. "Every person who came forward, who testified, who refused to be silent anymore, we all won." Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. Luther stood at the microphones, Marcus beside him, this time no longer hiding their relationship. "Mr. Rowe, how does it feel to see justice served?" a reporter asked. Luther thought about the question. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about change. Rollins is going to prison, but if we don't address the system that created and protected him, there'll be another Rollins tomorrow. "What's next for you?" Luther looked at Marcus, then at Mrs. Chen, who was standing nearby, then at the city stretching out before them. "I'm going home. I'm going to help rebuild my neighbor's apartment. I'm going to continue working with the community to make sure this never happens again." "Aren't you afraid of retaliation?" "I've been afraid my whole life," Luther said. "Afraid of speaking up, afraid of standing out, afraid of making trouble. But you know what I learned. The thing you're afraid of is never as powerful as the fear itself. Once you stand up to it, once you face it down, it shrinks." That evening, Luther finally returned to his apartment building. The damage from the bombing had been repaired, and neighbors had pooled resources to help Mrs. Chen replace her belongings. As he climbed the familiar stairs, Luther felt the weight of the past weeks settling on his shoulders. In his apartment, he found flowers cards, messages of support from strangers across the country. His story had resonated beyond Winston Hill, becoming a symbol of resistance against corruption and abuse of power. Marcus helped him sort through the messages, and they found one that made them both pause. It was from Denise Jr. in California, a simple card with a photo of Luther's grandchildren holding a handmade sign, "Our grandpa is a hero." "You know what your mother would say about all this?" Marcus asked. Luther smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. "She'd say I took my sweet time about it, but I finally found my voice." That night, Luther stood at his window looking out at Winston Hill. The city looked the same, but he knew it had changed. The corrupt network that had operated with impunity for decades was broken. Good cops were speaking up. Communities were demanding accountability. It had started with a slap, a moment of violence meant to silence him. But violence had begotten truth, Truth had begotten courage, and courage had begotten change. Luther touched his face where the bruising had finally faded completely. There was no physical mark left of Rollins' assault, but the impact would last forever, not just on Luther, but on everyone who'd found their voice because he'd refused to lose his. His phone buzzed with a text from Williams. The DOJ is opening investigations in 3 other cities based on the Winston Hill model. You started a movement, Mr. Rowe. Luther set the phone aside and prepared for bed. Tomorrow there would be more work, community meetings, testimony for other trials, the long, slow process of rebuilding trust between police and community. But tonight he could rest. He was still standing, and he wasn't standing alone.